If you're a pop culture junkie who loves TV, film, music, comedy, and other really important stuff, then you've come to the right place. Get ready and settle in for Classic Conversations, the best pop culture interviews in the world. That's right, we circled the globe so you don't have to. If you're ready to be the king of the water cooler, then you're ready for Classic Conversations with your host, Jeff Dwoskin.
All right, Shelley, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You get the show going each and every week, and this week was no exception. Welcome, everybody, to episode 306 of Classic Conversations. As always, I am your host, Jeff Dwoskin. Welcome to another amazing episode of Classic Conversations. This is the one where everyone knows your name. We are talking with Phoef Sutton. He was the showrunner of a little show you may have heard of called Cheers. He's done a lot, and we're going to dive into a bunch of it, and that's coming up in just a few seconds. And in these few seconds, if you love Connecticut, if you love movies, well, then do not miss episode 305 with Ileana Douglas, because we cover both. It's an amazing episode, but also amazing right now. My conversation with Phoef Sutton. We're talking all about his career show running for Cheers, working with Bob Newhart, his hilarious yet short-lived show, Thanks So Much. We're diving in, and that's coming up right now. All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce you to my next guest, two-time Emmy Award winner, producer, New York Times bestseller, legendary writer for Cheers, Newhart, Bob. Welcome to the show, Phoef Sutton. Hey, what's up, Phoef?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for hanging with me.
Good, yes.
You have been showrunner on so many iconic shows. Do you ever just pinch yourself? You got to pinch yourself?
Well, I pinch myself when I'm doing it because I can't believe I get to do it. I love running shows. I just finished running a show for Hallmark, our comedy drama called Chesapeake Shores, and that was a wonderful experience. I made it up in Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and it was just marvelous. It was just marvelous. I loved it. So yeah, it's still fun.
How do you get connected to run a show? And it's a combination of things, right? It's one, you're there and then you evolve into the role, and sometimes you create the role, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard position to get to, and everybody wants to get to it. I originally got to it through Cheers. I was a staff writer on Cheers. That was my first job on television, and I stayed with the show for years, of course, because everybody did, because it was such a great show and you didn't leave that show. But, over time, people did leave. David Angel, Peter Casey, and David Lee went off to do Wings. I and Bill and Sherry Steinkellner took over the show then in it was Kirstie's second year. So I guess that was the seventh year. So I was promoted through the ranks I started as a staff writer, became a story editor, became a executive story editor, became a co-producer, became a producer, became a executive producer.
Let's go back in time for a second to how you got that job, because that's an interesting story as well. You'd written a Spec script for a different show.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't really know about how the business really worked. I mean, my entire knowledge of writing for television came from the Dick Van Dyke Show, watching the Dick Van Dyke Show. That's actually pretty accurate. I had a friend who I went to college with named Barbara Hall. We both went to James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Go Dukes. She was a year or two ahead of me, and we worked on the newspaper together. And she was writing for the show Newhart, the Bob Newhart's second show, the one in Sutton, Vermont, in the hotel. She sort of mentored me and told me that what you do when you want to get on staff for a show, what you did then, it's not so much what you do now, but what you did then was you write a spec script, sort of an audition script for an existing show. So I wrote an episode for Newhart, and you read it, and she helped me with it, and I rewrote it. It got into the office, and then she and everyone she knew left the show at the end of that year. So it was in the office, but nobody who knew me from Adam to care about it. And I forgot about it. And 3 years later, somebody called me from Newhart and they'd read the script. I don't know why they bothered to read the script. They must have had nothing to do that day and it got that far down in the pile. By then, not only had the writing staff changed, but the entire supporting cast had changed. So the show I wrote was, outdated, but they liked it. They thought it was a good writing, and they took me to lunch, and they were encouraging, although they didn't have any positions for me or any scripts for me. Because in those days, a television show, which had a season for a television show, then would go like 26 episodes. It's hard to believe when now they only go 8 or 10, but they go 26 episodes. The show had to hire 2 freelance writers to write 2 scripts a year. That was a Writers Guild rule. They don't have that rule anymore. They should, because it's a good way of introducing new people to the business and to the shows. So anyway, they didn't have any freelance scripts to give me, but they liked me and they gave me a free lunch, so that was good. Barbara's agent then looked at the script again and thought, well, it's pretty good, and sent it around. And one of the places he sent it to was Cheers, and Heidi Perlman read it, and they liked it, and they had me in to pitch. And I eventually wrote a freelance episode, and the next year I was hired on staff. But it was a very roundabout, weird path that when people ask me, how do you break in? I can't tell them that, because that was just so odd. Everybody's intro to the business is some odd little circuitous route.
What goes into what do you do to prepare yourself to write a spec script? I'm assuming it's probably similar prep if you do a freelance script, except the freelance script you're getting paid for.
Well, writing a spec script isn't really something that you do nowadays. But what you did then, you just watch the show a lot, get to know it, and then write it. And it's almost guaranteed that script won't get you a job on the show that you wrote it for. Because no matter how well you think you know the show, you don't know it as well as the people who are working on it. You don't know all the stories they've rejected and all the stories every story they've done before. And because this was before the days of streaming and video DVD, where you could literally watch every episode. I just had to watch as many as I could. But it can show somebody on another show who maybe doesn't know the show that you wrote it for that well, that you can construct a plot, write funny dialogue, capture the characters' voices fairly well, and do what you need to do to write a script. So the idea then was watch it a lot, write it. Hopefully you have some copies of scripts so you can format it the same way. Nowadays, what people tend to do is write a spec pilot, a pilot for your own show that you're imagining. Then people read it and note the same things: story construction, characters, funny dialogue if it's a comedy, dramatic dialogue if it's a drama, and whether it works or not. And again, when you write a pilot spec, it's very, very, very unlikely that anybody will pick up that pilot and decide to do it as a pilot. But somebody might read it and say, this guy can write, And then it's basically an audition for you as a writer. And also it's good to write these things constantly anyway, because every time you write something, you learn more and you get better at it. It's very important to write all the time. I write almost every day, and I still do. I'm fortunate in that I actually enjoy writing. I know a lot of writers who claim not to enjoy writing. I like to write.
For the freelance script for Cheers, how much did they help you succeed? Did they help?
Oh, well, I'll tell you about I had no earthly notion about how to pitch an episode for a TV show, for an existing TV show. So the first thing they do is they have you come in. This was in pre-production, before the show was in production, between, I think, the third and fourth year, I think it was. You're supposed to come in with story ideas. Well, I didn't know how to come in with story ideas. I came in with a lot of terrible story ideas, corny, stupid story ideas, and nothing sparked them. But somehow or another, I guess they kind of liked me because they had me in again. This time I was with Glenn and Les Charles, who created the show. And again, I came in with a bunch of story ideas. None of them went. There was one joke that they liked in one of my ideas, and then they built a story around that joke, although that joke didn't end up being in the show. I don't even remember how that joke related to the story they ended up giving me, but they ended up giving me a story, which I wrote, taking notes vociferously and all that sort of thing. And then they said, okay, go out, write an outline, bring it back in, and we'll give you notes on that. So I had an assignment. It was great. I was thrilled. I didn't know how to write an outline for a script for a network television show, but they gave me some samples of theirs. And so I wrote it, and I came in again, and they took it apart, gave me notes on the script, and then I went and wrote the script, brought that in. They gave me more notes on that, rewrote that, brought it in again, gave it to them. Boom, it was done, and I was very happy. And then they invited me to the taping of the show, to the filming of the show. We shot it on film. So I was in the audience, up in the audience with the warm-up guy talking to us and all that sort of thing. And I was watching the show. And I don't think there was a line of dialogue that was the same from my script. And I was just crushed. I was feeling like, I failed. I hadn't done a good job. And the scenes were basically shaped the same way. There were the same things happened in them, but all the lines were changed. And then the last scene was pretty much, a lot of it was the same, and the final joke was the same. But I just felt I failed miserably, and I went down on the stage, and everybody was, after it was over, just because I felt that I should say hi to them and sorry. They were very happy to see me. They thought I did a great job. And I realized, of course, in retrospect, later on, when I was working on scripts, that particularly from a freelance script, all you really want is something that gives the structure of it, that gives the bones of it. Maybe a couple of jokes will work, but every script, even the scripts that I would write when I was running the show, or that Bill and Sherry would write, or that David Lloyd would write, they all changed drastically the week of production, because you see rehearsals, you think of better jokes, you get tired of the jokes that are in there, you replace the jokes, you do that. And so every script is always dramatically rewritten, and any script that you see on that show, no matter whose name it is as written by, it was written by the room. It was written by the writers, all the writers in the room. And so in that sense, I succeeded. It was a success. And the next year, they asked me to be on staff, and I was thrilled to be on staff. I would have been thrilled to be on a staff of any show, but this was the best show on the air.
That must have felt really good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It felt great. It was terrifying. It was the room was filled with, everybody in the room had won an Emmy. Everybody in the room, there were legends. There was David Lloyd, there was Ken Levine and David Isaacs, there was Glenn and Les Charles, there was Jerry Belson, there was Bill and Sherry Steinkellner. Everybody was high up, and so I was terrified. I didn't speak for the first 3 months, which I think they appreciated. There were 3 writers hired the year that I joined the show, 3 beginning writers. And I was the only one that made it to the end of the year. The other 2 were let go. I was just terrified the entire first season that I would be let go.
Right, because at this point, you didn't know that this freelance scriptwriter was going to one day be showrunner.
Yeah. Mind you, the 2 writers who were let go ended up being showrunners of other shows too, and so they did fine. But still, it was a great learning experience. I mean, it was really my graduate school, and I didn't know anything about television. I'd written mostly for theater, and I think the people who become comedy writers usually come from they're improv actors, or they're people who wrote for advertising. They're musicians. They come from all sorts of different fields. But I was one of the few that came from theater, from playwriting. So I knew the experience of seeing a show on stage and knowing how it worked. But I didn't know anything about television or the terminology of television or anything. They don't give you any orientation. They just throw you in and hope you make a fool of yourself.
So you started season 4. That's the same season Woody Harrelson started.
Yeah. So I didn't know Nick Colasanto, but I started the season Woody joined the show. Yeah.
So even though you didn't know Nicholas, you came in at a very transitional point of the show, replacing this major character.
Yeah, and that was everybody spoke very fondly of Nick, and that was it was really hard on everybody. But at the same time, everybody loved Woody, and he was a great guy and real funny guy. We're around the same age, so we were starting together. It was a fairly tight show in the sense that there wasn't a huge divide between the actors and the writers. George Wendt was very friendly to me, he still is. And we were all working together to do the show. We didn't have that sense of, they're the actors and we're the writers. Wasn't that way.
But the actors must have had a real fondness for themselves, for that many people, jealousy, things can happen. People can get big heads, all that kind of stuff.
There were issues.
Were they?
Mostly it was a very happy show. It wasn't like a show like you hear shows about whether people count the number of lines they have or opposed to somebody else, or, they really hate the other people. There was none of that. It was, sometimes people got on people's nerves, but when you're working together closely every day for 11 years, that's going to happen. But in general, it was a pretty happy show. And I think it was mostly because a fish stinks from the head. And Ted Danson is just the sweetest guy, just the nicest guy in the world. And he was not a jerk. And so none of the other people could really get away with being a jerks either.
Ted Danson is one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, no, he is absolutely. And nothing like the character of Sam Malone. I mean, that was a real acting performance. He's nothing like that.
What's he like in real life?
Oh, he's sweet, intellectual, kind of obviously very liberal. He had a wonderful lack of confidence about him. I mean, there would be at one point every year when he would come in the show and say, "I just don't know how to hit on these women all the time. I don't know how to do it. How do you do that?" That was, one of the main things of his character, and he did not really know how to do that. We would tell him, "You're doing fine."
That's funny.
And he was not a athlete either. Actually, originally the part was written to be a football player. And when Ted was cast, they thought he looked more like a baseball player, which he does. He couldn't. I mean, there's one episode where we have a dream sequence where he's throwing the ball, and he just couldn't throw a ball like a baseball player. But oh well.
Oh, that's really funny. In season 6 is when Kirstie, Allie, joins. So that's another huge, probably one of the greatest transitions of all time. I mean,
well, yeah, and we were terrified. Yeah, I mean, everybody was understood why Shelley left. I mean, the show had been going on for 6 years. The Sam and Diane thing had really run its course. If she'd stayed with the show, I think the show would have gone for another year, and then it would have been over. So it was a great opportunity for the show to start fresh, but no show had ever lost its lead actor and gone on to succeed. I don't think any show has ever done that. And Shelley really was the lead. I mean, when you look at the shows from her seasons, she's the main character of almost every episode. And whenever we would have a problem with a story that wasn't quite working, it was always, well, can we get Diane into it? Because she wanted a lot from life, and she thought she knew better than everyone else and all that. So the Charles brothers were very, adamant about when they replace a character, you don't replace a character with the same. When they replaced Coach, they didn't replace him with another old baseball player. They replaced him with a character that was totally different. Still kind of dim, but, young, fresh-faced, all that. So the idea was, to bring in a hard-nosed businesswoman that Sam could spar with. People always compared the show to Tracy and Hepburn, and this was, I think the idea was to make her more like Hepburn. Make her a really somebody that he could butt heads with in a very dramatic way. And then they cast Kirstie, who unlike the rest of the cast, almost all the cast came from big, real strong theater background. She did not come from a theater background. She'd not done much theater at all, nor had she done much comedy. To say the truth, we didn't quite know why they chose her. And obviously this was, huge opportunity for the show to fail. But we had a couple of things going for us that weren't planned. For one thing, there was a part of the show has always been the conflict between the sort of the blue collar guys and the intellectual types. Frasier was already in place to sort of take that intellectual role. So Kirstie didn't have to do that. She wasn't going to come in and talk about poetry and ballet anymore. Frasier could do that. And the rest of the cast also, they'd grown and were so strong that in a way the show became an ensemble show more when Kirstie joined the show. But there were some growing pains. Definitely. She's a wonderful comedian, or was. Sorry. I still can't believe she's gone. She was a wonderful comedian, a sweet person, wonderful, silly, absolutely not in the least bit vain, didn't mind looking totally ridiculous. She was really fun to work with.
Yeah, it didn't hurt. She was hilarious.
Yeah. And actually the first role, the role as they had envisioned for her, the hard-nosed martinet character, she couldn't really play that well. They didn't really work that well. There was the last scene of her first episode, the scene in the office between the two of them. We must have shot that one every week for like 6 weeks. And at the end of every episode, we'd shoot it again. We'd shoot it again. We'd try to get it right. And we couldn't really get it right. And she wasn't that good at that sort of thing. But then I think around I don't know when it was, like the third or fourth episode, Glenn Les had written it as well. And it was revealed that she was in love with her boss. And she cried in it. And she's just one of the world's funniest criers. And so we realized, oh, that's what it is. She's not really this hard-nosed businesswoman. She's just trying to put on an act. And actually, she's a fragile bundle of nerves and all that. And then we had it. And then it was fine from then on out. Then it was great. Then we knew what we had. But that's the sort of thing you can only get when you work with the actors for an extended period of time and know what they're like, know what they are.
Yeah, that show was blessed with so many amazing people.
One of the other reasons the show could last so long was that the cast did change. I mean, Nick obviously passed away and Shelley left the show, but also, Frasier came in. He was only supposed to be in for a few episodes, and he came in and he was great, and he became a major character. Lilith was only supposed to be in one scene, and she was great, and more and more and more became a regular. All these people that were, so that when you were writing, year 8, it was a very different show than year 3. It had really a different cast. And that was something that I think people that do long-running shows should bear in mind. You have to keep it fresh that way. And of course, then in year 8, I guess, everybody sort of realized you don't leave that show. And then it did start to repeat itself a little bit more in year 10 and 11. 9, 10, 11. But what can you do?
What do you consider the greatest thing you wrote when it Cheers or oversaw or okayed that went on to be iconic?
Well, I mean, my favorite episode that I wrote of Cheers is the one called Dinner at 8-ish, where Lilith and Frasier have Sam and Diane over for dinner. Their past, Frasier and Diane's past comes out, and Lilith didn't know that, and they have a big fight and all that. It was just a good bedroom farce with a lot of slamming doors. And I really loved that episode. Yeah.
Awesome. Where everybody knows your name. Sorry to interrupt. Have to take a quick break. I do want to thank everyone for their support of the sponsors. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting us here at Classic Conversations. And that's how we keep the lights on. And now back to my conversation with Phoef Sutton. We're going to talk about life after Cheers. And then you left.
I left before the show ended. I would have stayed probably if I'd known that the next year was going to be the last year, but nobody knew that. Ted decided to end the show in the 11th year. And yeah, I left to do another show with Bob Newhart. Bob, that didn't last, but was, I thought, a very good show.
You also, though, worked on Newhart, though, right? I mean, we talked
did.
about you writing the Spec script, but you did work on.
I wrote, my first year as a freelance writer, I wrote an episode of Newhart and an episode of a couple of other shows you've never heard of. You could make a good living as a freelance writer in those days, not so much now. And I really needed it because I was, I'd gotten married and I was having a new baby and all that was coming in. So it was a lifeline that was thrown to me at just when I desperately needed it most.
What was the connection at Newhart that later they were able to pull you away from Cheers for Bob?
Well, I mean, obviously when you're writing for Cheers, people are coming up to you all the time and saying, you want to do this, want to do that, want to do this, want to do that, but nothing really, struck my interest until, I've been a huge Bob Newhart fan ever since I was a little kid, and I listened to the albums, and I loved the first show and the second show. And when I heard he wanted to do, I'd met him when we did the freelance one. But when I heard he wanted to do another show, I thought, yeah, sure, why not? That'd be great. And I did it with Bill and Sherry Steinkelner. And, I thought it was a very good show, but it didn't last.
Yeah, it was like his only one that didn't really kind of catch fire, right?
He had another one that didn't last.
Okay.
George and Leo, he had another one with Judd Hirsch. And the year it started was the same year that Everybody Loves Raymond started on CBS. They were both on CBS. They got essentially about the same ratings, but they decided to give Everybody Loves Raymond another chance, and they didn't decide to give Bob another chance. And Everybody Loves Raymond, of course, went on to do Legendary Business, and nobody remembers Bob.
I remember Bob. I do remember.
Thank you.
It was based on, loosely based on him being like a Bob Kane, right? Because he was a comic book writer.
He was a comic book artist, and it was before comic books. We were like ahead of the curve in all the ways you're not supposed to be. You know, it was a comic book show before comic books became a big deal. I went to Comic-Con to research it, and Comic-Con then was just literally a comic book festival in San Diego that a couple of hundred people went to, and it's not the major event that it is now. But it was good, a great cast.
Were you with it for both seasons? The retool with Betty White and Lisa Kudrow?
Yeah, that was a funny story. They used to do upfronts in New York at the end of when they announce the new season, and that's when they make the decisions about whether the shows are going to be canceled or picked up. And so it was after the first year. It had done okay. But we heard that CBS wanted to youthen, be a younger network and didn't want to be the old network they were always perceived as being, and that they were probably going to cancel the show. So we went to New York. Bill and Sherry and I went to New York, and we thought, everything we heard was that the show was going to be dead. So we thought, well, why not just try to throw something up there? We'll try to persuade them that we're going to change it totally. And we got this, and we left him. It wasn't a comic book artist anymore. He was a greeting card artist, and blah, 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 blah. It was all just a Hail Mary that we knew would fail. And it did indeed fail. They said, no, sorry, the show's not going to be on the schedule. We're not going to do the show. And so, we flew back to LA thinking, well, at least we tried. And then, I went back, I think it was home from the airport. I walked into the kitchen and the phone rang. And they said they changed their mind. They couldn't cancel Bob Newhart, and they were going to pick the show up. But then we had to do all those changes that we just kind of made up on the fly, never thinking we'd have to do them. And it was still a good show. Betty White, my God, I worked with her many times over the years. I worked with her on Boston Legal. She was a tremendous actress and a great person, but it didn't work. I don't know.
Eric Allen Kramer was on that as well.
Eric Allen Kramer, yeah, that was a great one, and was. Jerry Burns was on it. Jerry Burns.
Yeah.
He was, and Cindy Stevenson was still with it then. It's very hard to guess why things work and why they don't.
And then you were a consultant for News Radio?
Yep. I was on News Radio. Yeah.
Are those the Phil Hartman years or after?
It was just after, and it was the show that was horrible. It was a horrible thing that happened to Phil. I never knew him, but I knew a lot of people that did know him, and everybody said he was the sweetest guy. No, that was a difficult year. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the worst. Everybody loved Phil Hartman. He was one of my faves.
Yeah, I lived on The Simpsons. He's so great.
So you mentioned working with Betty White on Boston Legal. You spent a lot of time at Boston Legal.
Yeah.
What was it like working with David E. Kelley, James Spader, William Shatner?
It was great. I mean, I've been in the business for 34 years, and in that time, I've had 3 steady jobs. I had Cheers for 8 years. I had Boston Legal for 3 years, and I had Chesapeake Shores for 2 years. Other than that, I've always gone from one job to another. That's the burden of this career. You go from one job to another. But that was great. That was a great experience. It was wonderful. And the cast was terrific. Candice Bergen was a sweetheart. William Shatner was very fun, would sit and hold court. James Spader was a bit of a handful, but he was great. It would vary between, some years David Kelley wasn't very involved in it. So we could write it the way, we saw it. And then other years he would be very involved in it and basically write everything. And you just come in and sit there and read the scripts and that's interesting. It's interesting that's happening. I didn't predict that.
Yeah, I remember when David E. Kelley he was like Shonda Rhimes now. Like back then, like every show was a David E. Kelley show.
He had a whole studio in Manhattan Beach that was basically the David Kelley show. And there was Boston Common, Boston Legal, I don't know, some
Ally
wedding. Ally McBeal. It was some wedding show he did. I don't know. He did other shows. He had a whole factory running. He's still going strong. He must have about the longest career of anybody in the business that's ever. I don't know. He's really great. He was a sweet guy. I was on the show for 3 years, and I met him. I was in a room with him like 3 times. We'd send him the tapes, and he watched the show in his house up in Palo Alto, and he'd send notes and rewrite stuff and do stuff. But he was never when I was on the show anyway. He never went on the set, and he just I think he liked to think of the show as something that was in his imagination, and he didn't like to deal with the actors and people who are actually, doing the stuff. He didn't want to deal with that directly. I assume he can't quite pull that off anymore. He was a very interesting guy. Very interesting guy.
James Spader was a handful. Do tell.
Well, I mean, he just we'd trade off being on James duty for the week, we'd call it, because you'd be on the phone with him for hours talking about every line, every comma, everything in the script, even in scenes he wasn't in, and everything, and he would just go over everything and everything. It was totally worth it because, when it comes to doing those closing arguments, which are like 3 pages of dialogue nonstop, he was great. He was wonderful. So it was worth it to put up with it.
Did you guys have mugs that said "I'm on James duty this week"?
No, but I did have a story I often tell. I had a brain aneurysm that year, and I think the second year, in the middle of the second year, and basically almost died. And we're trying to figure out, well, what was wrong with me, what had happened, and they asked me if I'd been exposed to any toxins at work, and I said just James Spader.
You can always blame the aneurysm if he got mad, right? So,
well, I've never talked to him about that. I don't know, but he was all right. John Larroquette was a great guy. Renee Auberjonois was wonderful. It was a great cast. It was basically, it was a great for an hour show because the office was in the same building that the sets were in, that the studio was. So all you had to do was ride the elevator down, and you were in the sound stage. And there were, all the offices were in there. They did almost nothing on location because Manhattan Beach doesn't double very well for Boston. The courtroom stages and the office stages, it was right there. So it was a wonderful experience to sort of sit out and hang out with the actors and do that. And then on most hour shows, they usually shoot them far away from where the writers are. They usually shoot them in another city, in another state, in another country. So this was a very unusual and very pleasant, kind of like doing a sitcom in that way, that you could just go over to the set and hang out and talk to the actors.
Let's talk about Thanks. This is
Thanks.
This is a short-lived show, but the premise of it is it's about the Pilgrims' first year in America. I watched the pilot.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
It was hilarious. It was a very funny show. I pitched it when I had a deal, and I never thought they'd do it. Pitched it with my friend Mark Jordan Legan. I remember pitching it to CBS and leaving the office and thinking, well, that was fun, but we'll never do that. And then they called. They said they wanted to do it, and they did 6 episodes. And they didn't know what they had. They couldn't figure out how to give us notes, so we did it just the way we wanted to do it. And it had a great cast: Cloris Leachman, Kristen Nelson, Tim Dutton, Jim Rash was in it before he was famous. Catherine Houston was like her first job, who later on did the West Wing and Desperate Housewives.
Sure. Yeah. And Jim Rash was amazing on Community.
Jim Rash was wonderful. Like, I loved him. He was so wonderful. It was just a wild, fun show. It was sort of it had Glenn Shaddix and John Fleck, and all these people in it were great. When Orson Bean was one of the guests one time, and it was as much a parody of sitcoms as it was of Pilgrims. And it was fun. It was very fun. We only did 6 episodes, and the star, who was a British actor, sort of thought, well, that's about par for the course for a series. Do 6 episodes. Now that's the way it is again. That's the way it is in America now. We do 6 or 8 and we're done.
Right, tight seasons. Right, yeah. The BBC, they do short. They don't drag it out.
Yeah. Well, I think there are like Fawlty Towers. Everybody talks about that being the greatest shows ever. There are, I think, 13 episodes of Fawlty Towers altogether, entirely.
Right.
So I don't know. I did not. I was more surprised that they let us do 6 than I was surprised that they canceled us after 6.
That's really fun. I think the original Office only had 14 episodes.
Yeah, the British one. Yeah,
with Ricky Gervais. But the funny thing is, so watching Thanks, which it's on YouTube, you guys can find it. It's got some really good laughs. For a pilot, you guys were nailing the jokes right off the bat. It was really funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a great subject matter, and it was great. And the scene when Jim comes in and tries to rob the store with a flintlock, where he's got a load
musket, loading the musket.
It was just great.
It's funny when you see like Cloris Leachman, because she always looked old. She was alive for another 2 decades after this. It was like late 90s, but she always looked old. Like Like, same with Betty White.
And she was great to work with. God, I loved her. She was a wonderful person.
You know, it's funny. I was interviewing John Provost, Timmy from Lassie, and I didn't
Oh,
know this
wow.
and didn't know this until I was interviewing him. But Cloris Leachman was the original mom before Gene
Yeah,
Lockhart.
yeah. Oh,
Short
that's right.
period of time, but yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, I met, you see her in I think one of their first movies was Kiss Me Deadly. And, she's gorgeous in that movie. She had a legendary career. So many great things. So many, and so great at comedy and drama.
Yeah. You know what else she was? She was Linda Carter's Wonder Woman's mom in the pilot of Wonder Woman.
Was she? Wow. I didn't know that.
It's like
Yeah.
crazy. Oh, let's talk about your podcast.
Yeah, I do a podcast with Mark Jordan Legan, who I created Thanks with. I do a podcast about films it's called Film Freaks Forever, and it's a podcast where we talk about old movies and new movies, analyze different genres per episode. Wonderful. We do about one a month, unless we're working, and then we don't do them. But
that's awesome. Yeah, I was listening to some of your episodes. You guys are really good together, and
good.
And you guys go deep. I was impressed.
We go deep. That's the theory. Well, which one did you listen to? Do you remember?
Yeah, Attack All Monsters.
Attack All Monsters. Okay, great.
I mean, I'm going to start listening to all of them, but because it's exactly what I love. And some of these movies I've never heard of. I mean, you go really deep into some.
Well, we've seen a lot of movies over the years. There was one podcast we did early on about ventriloquist dummy movies that I really loved that. That was you have to go deep into that.
Yeah, well, I love that you research the movies and kind of dive deep into the genre, and if you're a movie lover.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I think it's cool to learn about movies that you don't even know.
No, it's great. I mean, and I'm amazed that I've been watching movies since I was a kid. Every chance I got, I used to go to the rep houses in Washington D.C. and then watching TV, watching Turner Classic Movies, watching all the stuff it's on and available in the video stores. We still have a video store in South Pasadena. We still have a video store, Videotech. Long live Videotech. I'm still amazed that there are movies I can find that I haven't seen. It's such a rich field to go into. But I also know a lot about television history because I wrote for television and felt that I should
part of it.
I should know what came before. I remember Jerry Belson was pitching a joke on Cheers, and it didn't go. And then in the room, and he pitched it again, and it didn't go. And finally he said, "Come on, that killed on Taxi." and he said, well, what's gone before is good too. I just think, you have to know. I mean, that documentary series they did on the sitcom a few years ago, I just hated that so much because it really acted as if the sitcom started with Seinfeld. I mean, I guess they had the Honeymooners and I Love Lucy on it, but they didn't have Bilko, they didn't have Dobie Gillis, they didn't have any of the, really fundamental shows the whole form is based on.
Yeah, I love the whole deep dive when people start talking about Lucille Ball and Desi Liu and everything they did to revolutionize the industry, and that we wouldn't have Mission Impossible, we wouldn't have Star Trek without them.
Yeah.
There's so much history rooted in Desi Liu in itself. It's crazy. Yeah, all that history is amazing. We could talk about that forever. I know I've kept you for a long time, but we didn't talk about Rob, Coupling, The Fighting Fitzgeralds, Naked Truth. I mean, I can go on and on.
Boston Legal, Terriers.
Sorry. Oh, we talked about Boston Legal, but Terriers.
Chesapeake Shores.
Yeah. Just so much.
Defiance.
Thank you for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it.
It's been fun. We could do it again.
Absolutely. We could dive into some movies.
Yes, definitely.
Where do you hang out? I'll put links on the show notes, but do you have a website or a Twitter or Instagram that you hang out?
PhoefSutton.net. Facebook under Phoef Sutton, and also Film Freaks Forever. On Twitter as Phoef Sutton. Instagram as Phoef Sutton. Yeah, and I'm on Film Freaks Forever on Facebook too. All that, you can get in touch. Ask me anything.
Phoef, thank you so much. It was a pleasure hanging out with you.
Thank you. It was great.
All right, how amazing was Phoef Sutton? He has done so much, brought us so many classics. Go rewatch Cheers right now. You owe it to Phoef. Also check out his podcast. Head on over to phoefsutton.net. Phoef has written a ton of books we didn't even talk about. Check those out. Phoef is a national treasure. Well, the interview over, that can only mean one thing. That's right. The episode is over. I can't believe it either. One more huge thank you to Phoef Sutton. And of course, another huge thank you to all of you for coming back week after week. It means the world to me, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Classic Conversations. If you like what you heard, don't be shy and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Also, why not go ahead and tell all your friends about the show? You strike us as the kind of person that people listen to. Thanks in advance for spreading the word, and we'll catch you next time on Classic Conversations.